Jake Morrison sat in his tiny apartment, staring at the blue hologram floating above his kitchen table. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he couldn't look away from the message. It had to be fake. It had to be some kind of scam. 3 tours in the Marine Corps had taught him to spot trouble, and this screamed trouble. The message claimed he'd inherited something from an alien king. An actual alien king. Jake had been out of the service for 2 years now, living on disability checks that barely kept the lights on. His right leg still ached every morning from the injury that ended his career. Some days he could barely afford instant noodles, and now someone wanted him to believe a king left him something? He reached for his phone to delete the message, then stopped. The seal at the bottom looked real. The official Galactic Council seal that you saw on news broadcast. His hand hovered over the delete button. Mr. Morrison, the translator device read out loud in that weird flat voice that all alien tech seem to have. You have been named as the sole beneficiary of King Valdris of the Draken Empire. Please report to Intake Terminal 7 at the Chicago Spaceport to collect your inheritance. Jake pulled up his laptop and started searching. Scams targeting veterans were everywhere these days. Fake job offers, phony investment schemes, people pretending to be from the VA. He'd learned to ignore most of them. But after 20 minutes of searching, he found it. News articles from 3 weeks ago. King Valdris of the Draken Empire had actually died. Heart failure, they said, though Jake figured alien biology probably worked different. He sat back in his chair, mind racing. Why would an alien king leave him anything? He'd never even met a Draken. Sure, he'd seen them on the news, huge dragon-like creatures that looked like they could bite a car in half. But he'd never served with them, never worked with them, never even been on the same planet as one. The next 2 days dragged by. Jake kept checking to see if the message was still there, half expecting it to vanish like some kind of dream. But it didn't. Finally, his curiosity got the better of him. What did he have to lose? If it was a scam, at least he'd know. If it wasn't, well, maybe his luck was finally changing. The spaceport was massive, bigger than any building Jake had ever been in during his time on Earth. Ships from a dozen different worlds sat in docking bays that stretched up toward the ceiling like metal giants. The smell of fuel and ozone filled the air. His leg was already hurting from all the walking, but he pushed through it. Terminal 7 was in the cargo section, away from the passenger areas. That should have been his first warning. The second warning was the armed guards standing outside a warehouse that looked like it could fit 3 football fields inside it. A Draken official met him at the door. The alien was about 7 feet tall, wearing what looked like an expensive suit tailored for someone with a tail. His scales were a deep green color, and his eyes were sharp as he looked Jake up and down. Mr. Morrison? The official asked, his voice coming through a translator collar around his neck. That's me, Jake said, trying not to show how nervous he was. Follow me, please. And I must warn you, you have the option to refuse this inheritance. However, refusal will incur standard processing and transportation fees of approximately 200,000 credits. Jake's stomach dropped. 200,000? He had $347 in his bank account. And if I accept? Then the inheritance becomes your legal responsibility. The official's expression was hard to read. I should mention that 12 planetary governments currently have restraining orders filed against your inheritance. They walked into the warehouse and Jake saw it. A containment pod the size of a shipping container, surrounded by workers and equipment. The thing looked like it could survive a nuclear blast. Whatever was inside had to be dangerous. What exactly did the king leave me? Jake asked. The official pressed a button on his tablet. The pod's hydraulics hissed to life, loud enough to make Jake's ears ring. A ramp extended downward and steam poured out from the opening. Inside the pod, 2 yellow eyes opened in the darkness. They glowed like headlights fixed right on Jake. Please step back, Mr. Morrison, the official said, and for the first time, Jake heard real nervousness in his voice. Croth can be unpredictable. The creature that walked down the ramp made Jake forget how to breathe. It was massive, 15 feet from nose to tail, covered in deep purple scales that looked like armor plating. Wings were folded tight against its back, and each claw looked sharp enough to cut through steel. Scars crisscrossed its body, old wounds that told stories of battles Jake couldn't imagine. The dragon moved with a slight limp in its back left leg, and somehow that detail made it seem more real. Then it spoke and Jake nearly fell over. So you're the lucky winner, the dragon said in perfect English with an accent that sounded like it came straight out of Texas. The voice was deep and rough like gravel in a blender. Name's Croth. I eat about 40 pounds of food a day. I got nightmares that'll wake up your whole building, and apparently 12 different species got legal orders keeping me away from their planets. Still want me? Jake stared. The dragon stared back. Neither of them moved. The official thrust a tablet at Jake. Sign here to accept, or here to refuse and accept the fee payment plan. Jake looked at his bank account on his phone. $347. He looked at the dragon, who watched him with eyes that seemed almost resigned. Like Croth expected to be rejected. Like he was used to it. Jake knew that look. He'd seen it in the mirror enough times. He signed the acceptance form. The first week living with Croth was complete chaos. Jake's apartment was barely big enough for one person, let alone one person and a 15-foot dragon. On day 2, Croth tried to turn around in the hallway and his tail went straight through the drywall. The hole was the size of a basketball, and Jake could see into his neighbor's apartment. Mrs. Chin next door screamed so loud that 3 other neighbors called the police. The landlord showed up an hour later, took one look at Croth, and started yelling about lease violations and property damage. Jake managed to calm him down, but the threat of eviction hung over them like a dark cloud. Then there was the food situation. Croth hadn't been joking about eating 40 pounds a day. Jake's entire grocery budget for the month disappeared in 48 hours. He watched in horror as Croth consumed 6 whole chickens, 10 pounds of ground beef, and an entire case of protein bars without even slowing down. "I can eat less," Croth offered, noticing Jake's worried expression as he checked his bank account. "No, you need to eat," Jake said, though he had no idea how he was going to afford next week. "We'll figure something out." The noise complaints started on day 3. Croth's claws scraped against the linoleum floor whenever he moved, a sound like nails on a chalkboard that echoed through the thin walls. Neighbors banged on the ceiling and walls, shouting for quiet. Jake tried putting down rugs and blankets, but it barely helped. But the worst part was the nights. Croth had nightmares. Bad ones. The kind that made the whole building shake. Jake would lie awake in his bedroom, listening to the dragon thrash and whimper in the living room. Sometimes Croth would call out in his own language, desperate sounds that didn't need translation. On the 8th night, Jake woke up to his bed sliding across the floor. The entire apartment was shaking like an earthquake had hit. He could hear Croth in the living room, the sound of claws tearing through the floor, furniture crashing, that deep voice shouting words Jake didn't understand. Jake grabbed his cane and limped out of the bedroom as fast as he could. His leg was screaming at him, the old injury flaring up from the sudden movement. In the living room, Croth was thrashing like he was fighting an invisible enemy. His eyes were open but seeing something else, somewhere else. Deep gouges had been carved into the floor, and the couch was flipped over. "Croth!" Jake shouted, staying back from those massive claws. One wrong move and the dragon could kill him without even meaning to. "Croth, wake up. You're dreaming." The dragon's movements got more violent. His tail swept across the room, smashing the coffee table into pieces. Jake ducked, heart pounding. "Croth, it's Jake. You're in Chicago. You're safe." Jake kept his voice loud and steady, the way his sergeants used to do when someone was having a panic attack in the field. Suddenly, Croth's eyes snapped into focus. Those yellow eyes found Jake, and for one terrible second, Jake thought the dragon didn't recognize him. He gripped his cane, ready to defend himself or run, though he knew he'd never be fast enough. Then Croth's whole body went slack. The dragon collapsed onto the floor, breathing hard, looking smaller somehow despite his size. "Sorry," Croth said, his voice rough and shaky. "I'm sorry I was back there. On Sorrow's Gate." Jake's leg was throbbing, but he made his way to the overturned couch and sat down on it anyway. The apartment was destroyed. The floor was ruined. His security deposit was definitely gone. But all he cared about right now was the broken look in Croth's eyes. "You want to talk about it?" Jake asked quietly. Croth's head turned away. "Why would you care? You're stuck with me. You don't have to pretend." "I'm not pretending." Jake rubbed his bad knee, trying to ease the pain. "I know what nightmares look like. I know what it's like to wake up and not know where you are. You're human. You wouldn't understand." Jake let out a bitter laugh. "IED on my last tour. Improvised explosive device hidden in the road. It killed 3 of my friends instantly. Took my knee and ended my career. I spent 8 months in the hospital and another year in physical therapy. And yeah, I still wake up thinking I'm back there sometimes. I can still hear the explosion. Still smell the smoke." Croth's head swiveled back toward him, those intelligent eyes studying Jake's face. "You're broken too. We call it service-connected disability in the paperwork, but yeah, broken works." Jake gestured at his leg. "I can't run anymore. Can't do half the things I used to. The VA says I'm 30% disabled, whatever that means. Some days I can barely get out of bed. Something changed in Krotha's expression. The walls came down a little. Sorrow's Gate was supposed to be a simple operation. King Valdris and I had flown together for 200 years. We were bonded, connected in a way your people don't have words for. He wasn't just my rider. He was my brother. Jake nodded, not interrupting. Then they used chemical weapons. Illegal, banned by every civilized species. The gas destroyed my fire glands, burned out my throat, damaged my vocal cords. In Draken culture, a dragon who can't breathe fire is defective. Worthless. We're defined by our fire. That's stupid, Jake said flatly. Kroth blinked. What? I said it's stupid. You're still you. Still strong, still smart, still a warrior. So you can't breathe fire. So what? I can't run. Doesn't make me worthless. My own people thought so. The King's Council called him weak for keeping me. They said he should have ended my life with honor rather than let me live as a disgrace. Krotha's voice dropped to barely a whisper. When he died, they shipped me off the same day. Couldn't wait to get rid of me. Jake felt anger rising in his chest. My command did the same thing. Left me in the hospital for 8 months. Didn't visit. Didn't call. Once I couldn't fight anymore, I wasn't useful. They sat in silence for a while, a broken marine and a broken dragon, surrounded by the wreckage of the apartment. Outside, the first light of dawn was starting to show through the windows. We're a mess, Kroth finally said. Yeah, Jake agreed. But we're still here. Something passed between them in that moment. Understanding. Recognition. Neither of them was alone anymore. The break-in changed everything. Jake had thought they were safe after fighting off those first 3 attackers, but he was wrong. Word had gotten out that a human veteran was living with a Draken war dragon, and apparently that made them a target. 2 weeks after the first attack, Jake woke up to the sound of his window breaking. 4 men in tactical gear came through with weapons drawn. Kroth had roared and fought them off, but not before they'd fired dozens of rounds into the apartment. Jake had to dive behind the kitchen counter, his bad leg nearly giving out. The cops showed up 20 minutes too late as usual. Corporate mercenaries, the detective said, looking at the bullet casings. Probably hired by someone who wants your dragon. He's not my dragon, Jake said tiredly. He's my friend. The second attack came just 3 weeks later. This time it was worse. Black market traders who wanted to kidnap Kroth and sell him to an illegal fighting ring somewhere in the outer colonies. They'd used tranquilizer darts and electric nets. Kroth had fought through it, his 200 years of combat experience showing as he tore through their equipment like paper. But Jake had taken a hit to the ribs during the fight, and now he was pretty sure one of them was cracked. They sat in the destroyed apartment after the cops left, both of them battered and exhausted. We can't keep living like this, Jake said, wincing as he pressed an ice pack to his side. The walls were covered in bullet holes now. His landlord was definitely going to evict them this time. We need money for real security, or we need to disappear somewhere. Krotha's tail swished back and forth in frustration, a habit Jake had learned meant the dragon was upset. In case you haven't noticed, I'm not exactly subtle. I'm 15 feet long and purple. Where am I going to hide? And you can barely afford ramen noodles. Jake couldn't argue with that. His bank account was nearly empty. The disability check came in every month, but it was meant to support one person living a simple life, not a person and a dragon who ate like a small army. They were broke, they were targets, and Jake had no idea what to do about it. He opened his laptop and started scrolling through job listings for what felt like the 100th time. Everything either didn't pay enough or required physical abilities he didn't have anymore. His leg made it hard to work construction. His injury disqualified him from security jobs. And retail work wouldn't even cover Krotha's food budget. Jake was about to close the laptop in frustration when an article caught his eye. It was about the Galactic Council and their ongoing problems with interspecies communication. Apparently, 3 different trade deals had fallen apart in the last month because the automatic translation systems couldn't handle the cultural nuances between species. He read it twice, an idea starting to form in his mind. Kroth, Jake said slowly. You speak 14 languages, right? The dragon looked up from where he was lying on the floor. 15 if you count the Moth Clan's dialect. Why? And you understand the cultural stuff too. Like, you know how different species think, how they do business, what insults them or honors them. Krotha's eyes narrowed. I've been to 47 different planets and served in diplomatic missions for King Valdris. Yes, I understand cultures. Where are you going with this? Jake pulled up another article, his heart beating faster. This one was about a mining company that had lost a 50 million credit deal because their AI translator had accidentally told the alien suppliers that their mothers were livestock. The whole negotiation had collapsed in hours. "You can't breathe fire," Jake said, his mind racing. "But you can do something that might be even more valuable. You can talk. Really talk. With context and understanding." Croth sat up, interested now. "Explain." Over the next hour, Jake laid out his idea. Every day, companies and governments tried to negotiate with alien species. They used AI translators, but those systems were terrible at understanding context, tone, and cultural meaning. What if Croth could offer something better? Real translation with real understanding, provided by someone who'd actually lived among dozens of different species. "It's crazy," Croth said, but Jake could see he was considering it. "Crazy is living in this apartment waiting for the next group of mercenaries to break down our door," Jake shot back. "At least this is crazy with a chance of working." The next 3 months were brutal. Jake took out a small business loan, maxing out the only credit card he had left. He spent every waking hour researching brain-computer interfaces, watching videos, reading technical manuals until his eyes burned. His background in military communications helped, but this was way beyond anything he'd done in the service. He bought equipment at salvage yards and discount alien tech shops, cobbling together parts that were never meant to work together. Some days he wanted to quit. The loan money was running out. The technology wasn't working right. Croth's biology was different from anything the commercial interfaces were designed for. But Jake was a Marine, and Marines don't quit. On day 92, sitting in their new apartment that was barely better than the last one, Jake finally got it working. The neural interface looked like a mess of wires and alien tech, held together with zip ties and hope, but when Croth put it on and connected to Jake's computer, it worked. "I can feel it," Croth said, his voice filled with wonder. "I can access the translation databases, pull up cultural information, everything." Jake leaned back in his chair, exhausted but grinning. "Think you can use it in a real negotiation?" Only one way to find out. Their first client was a small mining company that needed to negotiate with a Draken supply firm. The company was desperate enough to try anything, even a washed-up veteran and his dragon. They offered 5,000 credits, take it or leave it. Jake and Croth took it. The negotiation lasted 3 hours. The mining company's AI translator kept making mistakes, but Croth caught every single one. He didn't just translate words, he explained why certain phrases would be insulting, suggested better approaches, helped both sides understand what the other really wanted. When it was over, the mining company had their deal. And Jake and Croth had their first real paycheck. "This might actually work," Jake said, staring at the 5,000 credits in their account. Croth's laugh rumbled through the apartment. "Might? Human, we're going to be rich." The shuttle ride to Luna Station took 6 hours, and Jake spent every minute of it feeling sick to his stomach. This wasn't combat nerves, the kind he'd felt before missions in the Marines. This was different. This was the knowledge that if he screwed up in the next few hours, Croth would die. And probably Jake too. "You don't have to do this," Croth said for the 10th time. The dragon was crammed into the cargo section of the shuttle, barely fitting even with his wings folded tight. "You could walk away. Tell them I forced you. They'd believe you." "Shut up," Jake said, not unkindly. He was reading through his notes again, going over every argument, every piece of evidence. "We're in this together." Luna Station was massive, a spinning wheel of metal and glass that housed the Galactic Council headquarters. Jake had seen it on news broadcasts 100 times, but seeing it in person made him feel incredibly small. This was where decisions affecting trillions of beings were made. And he was just a broke veteran from Chicago with a bad leg. The Galactic Council chamber was even more intimidating. The room was designed to hold every species in the known galaxy, from the tiny Pixans who were barely a foot tall to the massive Galmarts who needed 50 feet of clearance. The ceiling stretched up so high Jake could barely see it. Hundreds of seats arranged in circular tiers, each section designed for different species. Jake stood at the human-sized podium, feeling incredibly exposed. His leg was already aching from the walk through the station. He'd worn his old Marine dress uniform, the only nice clothes he owned. The medals on his chest felt heavier than they should. Across the chamber, in the section reserved for the Draken Empire, sat High Queen Saravix. She was younger than her father had been, maybe only 100 years old by Draken standards. Her scales were deep crimson, polished until they gleamed under the chamber lights. She looked like she was carved from rubies in anger. 3 other Draken nobles sat with her, all of them staring at Croth with open contempt. Jake had worked with one of them before, a silver-scaled diplomat named Ambassador Tkala. She'd hired them for a trade negotiation 2 months ago. He hoped she remembered that he'd done good work. "This council is now in session," a voice boomed through the chamber. The Draken Empire has brought charges against Kroth of Clan Valdris. Desertion, genetic deficiency, and unauthorized exploitation of Draken biological properties. Kroth stood beside Jake, his head held high despite everything. Jake could see the tension in the dragon's muscles, the way his claws dug slightly into the floor. Kroth of Clan Valdris, Queen Saravix's voice rang out, and it was like thunder. How do you answer these charges? Kroth opened his mouth to speak, but Jake stepped forward first. His heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. Your Majesty, with respect, Kroth didn't desert. He was inherited. Your father left him to me in his will. Murmurs ran through the chamber. One of the Draken nobles, an old male with scars covering his dark green scales, hissed. The human dares to speak for. The human has legal standing, Ambassador Tkala interrupted, and Jake could have kissed her. Mr. Morrison is Krotha's legal guardian under both Earth and Galactic law. He has the right to speak in this matter. Queen Saravix's eyes narrowed as she looked at Jake. Her gaze felt like being pinned by a predator. Very well. Speak human. Defend the defective one. Jake took a deep breath. This was it. Everything they'd built, everything they'd survived, came down to the next few minutes. Your Majesty, I'm a disabled veteran, Jake began, his voice steady despite his nerves. I served 3 tours with the United States Marine Corps. I was injured by an improvised explosive device that killed 3 of my friends and destroyed my knee. Where I come from, when soldiers get injured serving their country, we don't throw them away. We honor them. We thank them for their sacrifice. Kroth is not, the scarred noble started. Kroth served your father for 200 years, Jake continued, his voice getting stronger. 200 years of loyal service. He carried King Valdris into battle, protected him from assassins, stood by him through wars and peace. And when Kroth was wounded in battle, when chemical weapons destroyed his ability to breathe fire, what did your empire do? They called him defective. They called him worthless. He cannot produce flame. Queen Saravix snapped. A dragon without fire is what? Jake interrupted, and he knew he was pushing his luck, but he didn't care anymore. Is still a warrior who gave everything? Is still intelligent, strong, and capable? You want to talk about genetic deficiency? Let's talk about what Kroth has accomplished since leaving your empire. Jake pulled up a holographic display, grateful for the hours he'd spent preparing this presentation. Images appeared in the air above the podium. Kroth speaks 15 languages fluently. Not just translates them but understands the cultural context, the nuances, the unspoken meanings that AI systems miss completely. In the last 6 months, he's negotiated 4 major trade deals that saved thousands of jobs across 3 different sectors. He personally brokered a peace talk between the Moth clans and the Vergent Union, ending a conflict that had lasted 30 years. A conflict that your best AI translators couldn't solve. More images appeared, testimonials from clients, success rates, economic impact reports. He's done more for interspecies cooperation in 6 months than your empire has accomplished in 6 years, Jake said, looking directly at Queen Saravix. And you call him defective? The chamber erupted in noise. Aliens from dozens of species were talking, arguing, gesturing. The scarred Draken noble was shouting something in his own language that Jake's translator mercifully didn't pick up. Queen Saravix rose to her full height, her wings spreading. The chamber fell silent. Bold words, human, she said, her voice cold. But words are not proof. I challenge you to the trial of Karvith. Retrieve the Oath Stone from Karvith Prime. If you succeed, Kroth is pardoned and honored. If you fail. Her teeth showed in what might have been a smile. You both die. Karvith Prime looked like something out of a nightmare. Jake stared down at the planet from their shuttle window, watching volcanic rivers of lava snake across black rock plains. The sky was blood-red, thick with ash and smoke. Heat signatures on the scanner showed massive creatures moving across the surface, things that had evolved to hunt in temperatures that would melt steel. That's where we're going? Jake asked, though he already knew the answer. Right in the middle, Kroth confirmed, pointing with one claw at the holographic map. The Temple of First Fire. It's been there for 10,000 years, and it's killed about 90% of the Draken warriors who've tried to reach it. Jake did the math in his head. 90% fatality rate. Great odds. Traditional approach is straight through the main canyon, Kroth continued, studying the terrain with the experience of someone who'd planned hundreds of military operations. Maximum aggression. Use fire to clear out the automated defenses and the predators. Fly over the worst parts. Basically, hit it hard and fast. Can't breathe fire, Jake pointed out, checking his equipment for the 3rd time. He had his old service pistol, a combat knife, some rope, and a bag of supplies he'd cobbled together from military surplus stores. Not much for storming a death temple. So the traditional way is out. That's not the Draken way, Kroth said, and there was worry in his voice. They'll say we cheated if we don't follow the proper path. Good thing I'm human then. Jake grinned despite the fear churning in his gut. This was suicide and they both knew it. But what choice did they have? You've got 200 years of combat experience. I've got Marine Corps ingenuity and a whole lot of stubbornness. Between the two of us, we might just pull this off. The drop to the surface was rough. The shuttle bounced and shook as it descended through the ash clouds. Jake's leg was already hurting, and they hadn't even started yet. They landed in a narrow ravine on the temple's western side, a path that most Draken warriors would never even consider. It was too narrow for aerial assault, too winding for a direct charge. But it was perfect for two damaged warriors who'd learned that sometimes the smart way was better than the strong way. Stay close, Kroth whispered as they started moving. The walls of the ravine rose 30 feet on either side, casting everything in shadow. The temperature was already over 100 degrees and Jake was sweating through his shirt. The first defenses activated within 5 minutes. Automated turrets emerged from hidden slots in the rock walls, their sensors scanning for targets. Jake heard the whir of motors tracking them. They're locked on your heat signature, Jake said, pulling out the thermal decoys he'd bought from a surplus military store. They were cheap, barely military grade but hopefully good enough. He activated them and tossed them in different directions. The little devices scattered, each one emitting heat signatures similar to a living creature. Now! Jake shouted. Kroth moved fast, his powerful legs eating up the ground. Jake rode on the dragon's back, holding on tight as turrets opened fire. The plasma bolts hit the decoys instead of them, exploding against the rock walls. They made it through the kill zone in seconds. That actually worked, Kroth said, sounding surprised. Don't sound so shocked. I know what I'm doing. Jake was lying. He had no idea if any of his plans would work. He was making this up as they went. The temple entrance loomed ahead, a massive archway carved with ancient Draken script that Jake couldn't read. The doors were open, which somehow made it more ominous. They stepped inside and immediately the temperature dropped. The walls were covered in more carvings, depicting dragons breathing fire and fighting in ancient wars. State your purpose. A voice boomed and a hologram appeared in the center of the chamber. It showed a massive Draken warrior, covered in battle scars, wings spread wide. We're here for the Oath Stone, Kroth said, his voice steady. The hologram's eyes focused on Kroth, scanning him. You are defective. Analysis shows no functional fire glands. You cannot breathe fire. Jake slid off Kroth's back, stepping forward. No, but he's worth 10 of your so-called perfect warriors. You want to test us? Go ahead. Test us both. The AI paused, and Jake could almost feel it processing this unexpected response. Anomaly detected. A human defending a Draken. This is unprecedented. Initiating alternative protocol. The floor beneath them rumbled and split open. Jake and Kroth jumped back as an entire section dropped away, revealing a combat arena below. Mechanical drones emerged from hidden compartments in the walls, dozens of them each armed with energy weapons. Great, Jake muttered, pulling out his pistol. Of course there's more. The drones attacked in coordinated patterns, not randomly but with tactical precision. They were designed to test teamwork, to see if warriors could work together under pressure. Jake and Kroth had been doing that for months now. Kroth's tail swept 3 drones into a wall, crushing them. Jake rolled under another, coming up to plant one of his homemade explosive charges on its underside. The drone exploded, taking 2 others with it. They moved like they'd been fighting together for years, each knowing instinctively where the other would be. More drones came. Jake's pistol clicked empty, so he switched to his knife, using it to short-circuit a drone's control panel. Kroth used his claws, his teeth, his sheer mass to tear through the mechanical enemies. They were both wounded, both exhausted, but they kept fighting. Finally, the last drone fell. Jake was bleeding from a cut on his arm. Kroth had scorch marks on his scales. But they were alive. Assessment complete, the AI announced. Proceeding to final test. A chasm opened in the floor ahead of them, 50 feet across, with automated turrets on both sides. Energy weapons powered up, ready to fire. I can't fly with you on my back, Kroth said, staring at the gap. The weight would be too much. I'd fall. Jake looked at the chasm, then at the turrets, then back at Kroth. An insane idea formed in his mind. Then throw me. What?